Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Swihart, the Vice President of Marketing and Business Development for the Electric Coin Company. Welcome to our live stream for Q4 2019. We have problems clicking to my next slide. There we go. We've got a jam-packed agenda that includes what we see coming for Zcash in 2020, how we're structured to push Zcash forward, our plans to unleash Zcash for broader engagement, our near-term flight plan across various areas of focus, a perspective on development funding, and finally, a profile of some of our work we've been doing that ties all of these various efforts together. If you have questions, please go to Slido. You can just go to your browser, type in sli.do, and enter the event code ECC Livestream as you see it up on the screen. Also upvote questions you like or log your own, and we'll take as many as we can at the conclusion of the live stream. Now with that, I would like to introduce Zuko, ECC CEO, to talk about what he sees coming for 2020, why we're bullish on Zcash, and some of our big goals for the future. Zuko.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So this is why I'm bullish on Zcash. There's a lot of reasons, and I'm in a hurry because we have a lot of other cool stuff to tell you about after this. The first thing that encourages me about Zcash is governance. It may not be apparent to some people who aren't actually like working in the sausage making factory, but what we've seen over the past almost year now with governance is the emergence of more and more people who are part of the Zcash community and who have started speaking up and started engaging in the process of determining the future of Zcash for themselves. And this includes a whole bunch of just like volunteer independent people who contribute to the community in their spare time, businesses, investors, organizations, industry thought leaders, etc. And something that I love about it is that to every last person that I've ever talked to, they're here for the mission. They believe that Zcash is important, that it's important for humanity, and that it has a bright future, and they're committed to it for that. And so what I see going forward is that Zcash is going to have decentralized governance, and we'll talk a lot more about a bunch of critical details throughout this live stream, but the big picture is it's going to have decentralized governance, and it's also, it looks like to me, the community is heading towards making Zcash self-funding from the blockchain. And I think that's a critically important combination, because most open source projects and most public infrastructure and most cryptocurrencies aren't self-funding. And if you're not self-funding, then you're at risk of stagnation, but you're also at risk of capture from whoever shows up to fill the gap and provide the missing funding. So the big picture to me, I have 6 reasons why I'm bullish on Zcash, but this is one of the 2 most important ones, is that it seems really likely over the next several years that Zcash is going to be both decentralized and self-funding. I think that's one of the 2 most important strategic advantages that Zcash has. Now the process, which we'll get into, is scary and painful, like any transition from childhood to adolescence, but the outcome looks really bright to me from here. The next reason I'm excited about Zcash is our R&D and science and technology position. Zcash is the first real deployment of zero-knowledge proofs that everyone in the world can use and rely on, and that has worked successfully in the wild under attack. And that led to a blossoming of zero-knowledge cryptography research. And now, after a few years, that public cryptography research is starting to feed back into Zcash. We will probably, in the coming years, be able to upgrade to new improved cryptographic discoveries, which will eliminate the trusted setup questions, And it will also, I think, turn out that zero knowledge proofs are the key to scalability in addition to being the key to privacy. Now, there's one of the most promising of that new crop of science results is named Halo, and that came out of our team here at the Electric Coin Company, which currently, maybe I'm biased, but actually, no, it really, as far as I can tell, Halo is really the most promising one of the current crop. But if it turns out that something even better comes along, Zcash can also take advantage of that. So the second reason I'm bullish on Zcash long-term is that it's already the pioneer of the most advanced technology, and that technology has survived in the wild for several years, and Zcash is poised to continue taking advantage of the forefront of technology. The third is engineering. We have this long track record of security monitoring and fixes, deployment support, just basic engineering performance, bug fixing, etc. And going forward, what I see is Zcash supporting more users building other features on top of Zcash, using it as a platform and connecting it to other chains, of which we'll talk about more soon. But the promise of that includes the potential to connect Zcash into the DeFi ecosystem, where people can borrow and lend money like permissionlessly and frictionlessly and things like that. The next reason I'm bullish is regulatory, which at first blush might be scary because there is a really strong headwind against privacy and against cryptocurrencies in general in a lot of places. And as you know, we've invested heavily in regulatory outreach throughout the life of the Electric Coin Company since we launched Zcash. We attend meetings and sessions and write white papers and give lectures and educate regulators and lawmakers all around the world. And we've had like partial success, like Zcash and other privacy technologies such as end-to-end encrypted messaging and things like that are being targeted in some countries. But we've had a lot of success at getting Zcash integrated into the regulated companies in some countries, including critically USA. But I'm bullish on it long term, like mid to long term, like a few years to 10 years, because I've seen what happened with the introduction of encryption for the World Wide Web in the 1990s. And what I think is going to happen is that as cryptocurrencies start getting used as actual commerce instead of just speculation, and as they get starting to get used by businesses, it's clear that blockchain and cryptocurrencies are very much of interest to all kinds of governments, regulators, and businesses. And when they get used for that purpose, it immediately becomes clear that you need encryption as a security measure to protect the users, which is the same process we went through with the World Wide Web when the very first commerce started happening on the World Wide Web in the late 1990s. So that's the next reason I'm bullish. The next one is adoption. We've seen, I perceive like 2020, the near term, the next year, as two concentric waves of Zcash adoption. The first wave is the transparent address adoption, where over the last 3 years, Zcash has become, last time I checked, Zcash was literally the 5th most widely available coin around the world, thanks to transparent addresses. And I expect in 2020 that will continue, that more and more businesses and exchanges and wallets and new products like merchants and the open bazaar, decentralized marketplace, et cetera, will continue to adopt Zcash through transparent addresses, and at the same time that there will be another wave of support and adoption for shielded addresses, and that these two waves of adoption support one another. So that's more coming soon, as soon as I stop talking and turn it over to the next team. And then the last one, the first reason that I think is most important is what I said at the beginning, governance, that Zcash is going to be both decentralized and self-funding going forward. But the last one is also most important, and that's demand, which is that over the years since Zcash was born 3 years ago, we've seen privacy become a central concern for more and more people, for mainstream society. That's because of hacks. It's because of megacorps exploiting their users. It's because of cyber war. It's because of censorship. And these are increasingly prominent concerns for increasingly mainstream people. And that's really critical because it's very hard to teach people or persuade them to value something that's not currently at the front of their mind, but it's much easier to offer them a solution to something that they already care about. And so that's the other critical reason why Zcash has a really important role to play in the future of humanity, is that humanity in general is becoming aware of these major factors in all of society. Now, next slide is our incredibly heavy bags, our big, hairy, audacious goals. These are the kind of goals that we have come up with to inspire us and to challenge us. The first one is to have 1 billion people who use Zcash for their economic life. And this is not even just that they have an investment in Zcash, which they're holding for future protection against future financial threats, but that they're actually using Zcash and using it to earn and to purchase and to sell and to cooperate with one another. And this is extremely ambitious, but I also think it's quite doable, because the whole point of money is to enable people to help each other and to help other people. Money is like network effect incarnate. The value of money is more valuable to you the more other people can use it. And so if we can make Zcash serve the unmet needs of people, there can be a positive feedback loop where it becomes more and more useful to more and more people very rapidly. The second goal is to have an anti-fragile ecosystem, where if somebody targets and takes out part of the Zcash ecosystem, this just encourages the rest of us. And we've got a good start on that because of how we designed and set up the Electric Coin Company and the Zcash Foundation from the beginning, and the open source nature of the Zcash network and the software, and because of the volunteer community and all of those people that I mentioned who feel personally invested in the Zcash movement. But our goal is to have, in the long term, to have a really vibrant, like really well-funded, diverse ecosystem of many different companies that are getting funding either from the blockchain itself or from their other products and operations, which are sustaining and incentivizing for everyone to contribute more and more to the Zcash ecosystem. And finally, our goal is, now we don't want governments to fail and turn bad, but inevitably, when governments start letting down their people in the future and start using their financial system and their fiat currency to take advantage of their people instead of to protect their people, that happens inevitably every few years. And our goal is, there will come a time when those people who are getting let down and betrayed by their fiat currency will find Zcash to be the best alternative that satisfies their needs immediately. It's already there, it's ready, it works for what they need, and an entire population of people can switch to using it and to protecting themselves and being able to sustain and cooperate with each other, because that is the best alternative for them at that time. Those are our big, hairy, audacious goals. They're audacious, but it is the reason why we're all here, including everyone that I've talked to in the community. Okay, that's it. Turning it over to the next team.
Hey, Zuko, I have an important question for you.
Okay, is this already question and answer time?
No, it's not. It's just my question and answer time.
What
is going on in the picture behind you?
Oh, this is the real official Zcash mascot. It's a herd of zebra tardigrades relaxing in the savannah. and it was painted by an artist named Yonat Vax, V-A-K-S. You should like look him up, and he works for Zcash, of course. You can pay him in Zcash to paint paintings for you. The real official Zcash mascot.
The real official Zeal. All right. Thank you, Zuko. Okay, so I recognize, I mean, there's a lot of folks that are still kind of new to the community, but I wanted to spend just a little bit of time reintroducing the community to ECC, about who we are and how we work, how we're structured. So ECC is a team of about 30 people. In fact, I think we're exactly 30 people who work on efforts that include R&D, engineering, regulation, adoption, demand generation, and operations. We're an extremely eclectic team, a very high-powered team with some world-class folks and some strong passions. So we're passionate about math and world-changing cryptography and engineering, and turning crazy impossibilities into technology that just works with less talk and more do and more creating and more building. And we are passionate about governance and freedom and the importance of money in the service of freedom. We're passionate about educating policymakers and regulators and law enforcers and engaging the best academics without getting too bogged down in academics. We're passionate about collaborating with the best builders of exchanges and wallets and custody providers, and building alongside the best protocols and projects. And we're passionate about what's best for the person using or holding Zcash, because they and you believe in this common mission. So we're passionate about all these things. It's a strange and kind of unique chemistry that has bonded us, are these collective passions, and supporting Zcash to give people economic freedom and opportunity. It's why we're here. And we at ECC can't imagine doing anything else and anything less. I also believe that we see a future that others don't see. We're in this mix, we're in this soup day in and day out. We see solutions that others don't see, and we see nuances that are not apparent or obvious to others. The other thing that we have is the ability to turn that into reality. We invent scalable, privacy-preserving cryptography, and we realize it through software. I want to talk a little bit about how we work and what we do, and the difference between fireworks and flywheels. So we love fireworks. They're fun, they're exciting, and I think the average fireworks show is about 15 to 20 minutes long, and then we cheer and we all go home. There are plenty of crypto fireworks shows, and you can probably name them. But for us, we're not about the fireworks. We're doing something else, and bringing economic freedom and freedom to everyone requires something different. Instead, we built a flywheel because no single action or project is enough to move the Zcash needle. It takes sustained momentum across a number of activities, each flow into each other, each help the other one move forward, and all are necessary for moving Zcash forward over time. So I'll read to you this quote from Jim Collins in his best-selling book. No matter how dramatic the end result, good to great transformations never happen in one fell swoop. In building a great company or social sector enterprise or cryptocurrency, there is no single dividing action, no grand program, no killer innovation, no solitary lucky break, no miracle moment. Rather, the process resembles relentlessly pushing a giant, heavy flywheel, turn upon turn, building momentum until a point of breakthrough and beyond. So this is the ECC flywheel for Zcash. We're organized to deliver across each of these areas. These areas aren't independent, and they don't function independently. Each builds on each builds on one another as we gain momentum, and again push Zcash forward. So you can see first with research and development, we do research into cryptography and increasingly in markets and models. Core work, which often we're known for, is on the engineering front in terms of the core protocol and client reference libraries and tools. We work with regulators, as Zuko talked about, through education, and also working with regulated entities to kind of understand and put the regulation in context, specifically as it relates to Zcash and privacy preserving technologies. We work on adoption with all of the top exchanges and wallet providers, OTC desks, increasingly commerce providers, and we work on demand, which includes consumer awareness, education, partner marketing support, and community development. So these are some of the things that we have been working on over time. And again, each building on top of one another. For example, our cryptographic kind of groundbreaking research and development fuels engineering. Sapling was possible due to a quick cryptographic breakthrough in 2017. That fundamental engineering work on Zcash led to conversations with regulators on compliance, which in turn led to adoption by folks like Gemini and BitGo and Coinbase and others. And this adoption has made it possible to reach more people as Zcash has become synonymous with world-class cryptography engineering and really a gold standard for professionalism, thorough leadership and consistent delivery, and other areas such as our regulatory work, our work on responsible disclosure within the community, and things like trademark protections. Zuko mentioned Halo as an example. So this was announced as an example of our cryptographic research. This was announced in September, discovered by Sean Bowe, one of our cryptographers, with support from Dara Hopwood and Jack Gregg. Halo represents another breakthrough that may be the answer for trusted setup and may help dramatically scale Zcash through recursive proof composition. This breakthrough, though, may also have broad impact for both crypto projects and the future of the web. Another example of some of our work is regulation work that we do in the deep research and engagement with regulators around the world. This is led by Jack Abigan on our team, working with, again, regulators in the US, the UK, Japan, Singapore, and other places. And really working hard to kind of work not against regulators, but help through education as they grapple with both this new thing of cryptocurrencies, as well as implications for personal security, for business security, and ultimately for national security as well. This work, our track record for delivery and regulatory, I mentioned, Genesis. So we had done work with NYDFS that led to listing on Genesis. Genesis was, or Gemini, excuse me. Gemini was working in partnership with an organization called Flexa, one thing leading to another, and Flexa became supported on Zcash. So all of these things are intentional. And by the way, kind of as Zuko mentioned earlier, the first step to this was support for transparent addresses. So unless we had support for transparent addresses, we wouldn't have been able to kind of go through these kind of various steps for engagement with folks like Gemini and Flexa. So this does give us entry points into allies and access to the front lines that we wouldn't have if we were only supported by, or if we only supported shielded addresses. So using Flexa as an example, so users of the app are able to purchase consumer items such as ice cream, donuts, video games, movie tickets through their retail partner network that they've spent a lot of time developing, which includes folks like Baskin-Robbins, Caribou Coffee, GameStop, Topgolf, Nordstrom's, some of the top brands in the world. This is a picture of Linda from our team testing out the user experience. She's only got $1.46 left in her Zcash wallet, so I think we need to get her a little bit more. But she was able to purchase some ice cream. But I want to show you how easy it is to make that ice cream purchase using Zcash with Flexa. I'm going to show you a video, but don't blink or you'll miss how quick this payment occurs. Scan, done. And he was off to make her ice cream. So we're fast getting to that point where we don't have to wait for for all of these confirmations in order to make purchases, to buy your coffee at the coffee shop. And it doesn't even necessarily require layer 2 solutions like Lightning. We're not quite sure how that will all work out. But today, in many retail locations, you can go use your Zcash and buy your ice cream or your donuts or your coffee or your video games. We are also working on shielded adoption. So this graph is a representation of transactions by month by shielded pool. So if you recall, we initially launched with Sprout. The red represents Sprout transactions. The blue represents sapling transactions since that activated in October last year. And the green shows the number of transactions between the two pools. So somebody sending from a Sprout address to a sapling address. We have some nice growth over time. And again, this is from our inception with 81 transactions in October of 2016, with now over 1,900 transactions in October of this year. This is an aggregated view of that data. So the total anonymity set within each of the two pools. The red again being Sprout, the blue being sapling, and showing that in the first 3 years of Zcash's existence with the Sprout pool, we have about 16,500 total transactions in the shielded pool. In the year that sapling has been active, we have about 15,500 transactions in the last 12 months. So this is what we do and how we use our complementary skills and how they work together to increase the velocity of the Zcash flywheel. We'd now like to transition to our current plans. For that, I'd like to introduce DC, who is ECC's COO, and he'll walk you through our near-term strategy.
Great, thanks Josh, and good morning everyone. So Zcash just turned 3, celebrating our 3rd birthday of the mainnet activating in late October. And the first year was really just about proving that what we were doing was possible. Our second year was about making what was possible performant enough to make it usable. And the third year, which we've just concluded, has been about creating the building blocks to support widespread adoption. And now the fourth year, which we've just begun, is really about unleashing the capability of Zcash onto the world. So when we double click on that, what does that really mean? Well, first off, we see that Zcash is already listed on the best exchanges in the world and is supported by the best wallets in the world. Zcash is highly liquid, meaning that it's fairly easy to buy or sell a significant quantity of Zcash without moving the price on the market. Zuko mentioned and Josh touched on Halo, this notion of being able to get rid of the trusted setup. I'm going to dive into this briefly. The cryptography behind Zcash, which allows you to have these confidential or shielded transactions, which is really the key differentiator between Zcash and Bitcoin, initially depended upon this key generation ceremony that became known as the trusted setup. And the initial ceremony for the Sprout or version 1 of our software had, I think, 6 participants, all of whom would have had to collude in order to defraud or break the system. With the sapling release, Sean Bowe and our team coordinated a very much larger ceremony that I think had something like 80 participants. I was pleased to be one of those participants. And every single one of those participants would have had to collude to defraud the system. Highly unlikely. But in crypto, a lot of people come to crypto because they want to put their trust in mathematics, not in human beings. And what Halo does is it opens the door to provide a way so that a subsequent release of Zcash may be able to do away completely with that trusted setup. Since the beginning of the Zcash project, we've always believed that decentralization of the people working on Zcash was necessary in order for the mission to succeed. And so years ago, Zuko and other founders of the project created the Zcash Foundation and literally donated significant chunks of their wealth to make the Zcash Foundation a reality. And we're now seeing the foundation is really getting legs and building and doing more. we want to move that decentralization beyond just the Zcash Foundation. We want to welcome in third-party developers, other entities, and other individuals to build on Zcash. So instead of crowding them out, we want to welcome them in. So I mentioned that Zcash is listed on all the best exchanges and supported on all the best wallets. Well, critics of the project will say, yeah, but the shielded technology is quite difficult to use. And the shielded technology, to be completely transparent, it's our reason for being. It creates that separation between us and Bitcoin and Ethereum and other projects. And yes, historically, it has been pretty onerous and difficult to use, but that's changing, and it's changing very rapidly. Next slide, please, Josh. So recently, Aditya PK00, with support from the Zcash Foundation, released the Zec wallet. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Josh. This is a demonstration that shows how easy it is to download the Zec wallet, have it sync a very small portion of the Zcash blockchain, and then be able to send a Zcash shielded transaction all in less than a minute. And for contrast, previous Zcash software required that you synchronize the entire Zcash blockchain, which could take hours on a really fast connection or days for folks on slower connections. So here we see Kevin from our team is sending a shielded transaction, clicks send, he confirms, and look at how quickly this executes. This is a sapling transaction, boom, it's already done. So this is that big performance innovation and increase that we saw with the sapling release. So very excited to see Zec wallet out there live now. Aditya's work was supported by a grant from the Zcash Foundation. It does not require a full node. Like I said, it's easy to use and ready to use in seconds. And it also is built on top of the light client protocol that was developed by the ECC wallet team engineers. So hats off to everybody who was part of that. It's a huge step forward for making Zcash more usable. While we're on the topic of wallets, I want to talk for a bit about what the ECC wallet team has been up to. So we've adopted a strategy some time ago that we didn't just want to build and ship an official like ECC Zcash wallet. Instead, what we wanted to do was to create a robust set of software development kits that make it easy for companies that are in the business of building wallets and have wider distribution channels than we do to build these wallets. So I'm really pleased to share that the Android SDK is available now. Link is up there on screen. We did get feedback from partners that they didn't want to ship just an Android version of Zcash. They wanted to ship Android and iOS simultaneously. So we took that feedback to heart. We hired Paku, fantastic iOS developer who joined our team a few months back, and are rapidly iterating on the iOS SDK. We're also working with a couple of partners to bring shielded Zcash support to multi-currency wallets that you know and love, but we're looking for more partners to work with in bringing this to the world. So if you run a wallet team and you're interested in adding this support, please reach out to our team, and you can do so on the community wallet team on the Zcash Rocket chat. I'm super excited about Zcash evolving as a platform. As we just demonstrated, shielded Zcash technology is now easier to use than it's ever been. And I think right now, Zcash is primarily a private store of value. We have a vision for making it a medium of exchange. We saw Linda and Savannah buying ice cream with their Zcash, which is fantastic. But we get feedback from folks that, well, we don't want our money to be too programmable. Folks want to be able to build upon Zcash, but they don't necessarily want an Ethereum style Turing complete virtual machine built into Zcash, because they don't want that vulnerability. They don't want that type of attack surface for their private store of value. So Strad on our team has been working on a solution that he calls WTPs, which are whitelisted transparent programs, which add a layer of programmability onto Zcash without introducing the risk of that fully Turing complete VM. Nathan is going to dive into that here in a little bit more detail here in a few minutes. Bolt's a really exciting project that's being built on top of both Bitcoin and Zcash that creates a layer 2 solution that's not unlike Lightning, but unlike Lightning, it has confidentiality, protecting user privacy. We're also very excited to see the work that the Fly client team has been doing to make it much more efficient and fast for light clients to sync with Zcash and with other chains. And on Ethereum, an SPV client on Ethereum today needs to synchronize 4 gigabytes of data before it can be used. In comparison, the Fly client proof to get you up to speed is just 500 kilobytes. So this is a massive performance gain that we're very excited to see coming soon to the Zcash protocol. But looking outside of just the Zcash ecosystem for a moment, we see a surge of interest in the industry in decentralized finance, or DeFi. So what is this all about? And we look at DeFi Pulse here, and we see that a couple days ago, there was $663 million of funds. So more than $500 million locked up in the system. And this is essentially a peer-to-peer, decentralized, frictionless, no man in the middle type of lending platform. And it's really taken off here in the past couple months. What is driving this? Well, we're really not sure, but I have an idea. Next slide, please, Josh. So we see that in DeFi, people are leveraging or locking their traditionally Ethereum, although Maker is going to be introducing multi-collateral DAI here pretty shortly. But for the most part, DeFi is a lot of Ether being used as collateral and DAI, which is a stablecoin, being used for lending and borrowing. And why is this taken off so much? Well, we saw the commander-in-chief here of the United States recently say that Europe has pushed for negative interest rates. How about we do more of the same here? And I've talked to a lot of finance folks that don't think that will ever happen. And yet, we've seen the Federal Reserve in the United States cut the rate now 3 times just in 2019. This image here on the bottom is a snippet from an email I got from Wealthfront, letting me know that my funds that are on deposit with them that were earning north of 2% just a few weeks ago are now down to 1.82%. So I assert that crypto users are flocking to this DeFi movement because they want to be able to leverage their crypto to earn yields that are a lot more than what they can earn by letting their money sit in the bank. Now, I want to make it clear that people playing in this space should recognize that they're trading traditional counterparty risk. One second here. They're trading counterparty risk for literal cyber risk. There could be bugs in these underlying smart contracts that could be very detrimental to this ecosystem. So it's early days for DeFi, but I do think we're looking at a sneak preview of what the future for decentralized finance could look like, not just in the US, but across the world. So what implications does this have for user privacy? So I love Ethereum and I love Gitcoin. Gitcoin is it's founded by a Boulder person, Kevin Owocki. It's one of my favorite players in the Ethereum ecosystem. And I think that Gitcoin actually could have an impact way beyond Ethereum. And I think that Gitcoin could impact open source development as a whole. But what happens if you're like me and you like working on and funding issues in Gitcoin, which necessarily reveals your Ethereum address to the world? Well, as you can see here, my Gitcoin profile is on the right. You can see my my Ethereum address, OXDC, blah, blah, blah. You plug that into Etherscan and you can see all of my transactions, everything I've done, the CryptoKitties I've bought, what I've bought and sold, and even what I'm borrowing or lending. You can see which ICOs I did well on, which ICOs I got burned by. This is quite literally Twitter for your bank account. So what is the current state of privacy on the Ethereum network today? I had the opportunity to sit down with Vitalik over dinner at ZCon 1 in Croatia and talk about this at length. And what Vitalik was excited about that time was a mixer type solution. And he admits it's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. HiSwap is a mixer that's currently live on the Ethereum testnet. And Tornado.Zcash, which does use zero-knowledge proofs, is live on the mainnet. But as you can see from the screenshot here on the far left, the anonymity set, the amount of people using this is very small, not providing Ethereum users with much anonymity or flexibility. The Aztec project, which again is built on ZK Snarks, is just getting underway. So they're doing that trusted setup that I mentioned we're looking to get away from, but that process is now underway. Aztec has a lot of potential, but it's unproven. It has not yet gone live. Other teams are also working on privacy for Ethereum. Keep is a notable example that I think is also very bullish on ZK snarks. Now, what would a bridge between Zcash and Ethereum provide? Well, I think it could provide eventually some real meaningful privacy for users of the Ethereum network. So I'm super excited about the potential for Zcash and Ethereum to work together. And I think it really is a sort of love story. And I say that not just because Zuko and Vitalik are buddies and like to hang out and talk about snarks. I say that for the following reasons. First off, the Ethereum developer ecosystem is literally blowing up. We saw a lot of hype during the ICO bubble, early 2018. But despite the hype, the Ethereum in the bear market, the Ethereum ecosystem is still thriving. And we're looking to see 1 million active developers on the Ethereum platform in 2020. The Ethereum project recently launched the Istanbul hard fork supporting a Blake 2 hash function. Well, why is that interesting? Well, Blake 2 it paves the way for greater interoperability between Zcash and Ethereum, potentially allowing something like wrapped ZEC to work, where users could basically take their ZEC and lock it to make it usable on the Ethereum chain. But don't just take this excitement from me. Take it from the Ethereum team itself. So the Ethereum devs approved these changes as part of the Istanbul hard fork, and I've pulled from EIP 152 here from Ethereum's GitHub their rationale and motivation. Why did they do this? And the punchline here is that they say, interoperability with Zcash could enable contracts like trustless atomic swaps between the chains, which could provide a much needed aspect of privacy to the very public Ethereum blockchain. So lots of exciting stuff going on in the interop world. I do know also that the Zcash Foundation is working with the Cosmos folks to create a peg zone between Cosmos and Zcash, also keeping a very close eye on the great work that the Agoric team is doing in that space as well. So super excited. 2020 is the year that Zcash will be unleashed. Greater adoption, greater usability, and greater interoperability are the things that I'm most excited about. So with that, let me hand it back to you, Josh.
Thanks, DC. So what we're going to talk through with you now about is our flight plan across all of those various aspects or areas of the flywheel. We're going to start with technical R&D and engineering, and then we'll hit regulation, adoption, and demand generation. But to set some context, we're looking at this across 3 horizons. So the first horizon is really what's happening 0 to 6 months, and given the time of year, it's likely kind of mid 2020. 2020 is what we're looking at. For that period of time, for the next 6 months, we have a lot of clarity and confidence in these plans and funding and ability to execute. Horizons 2 and 3, 6 to 24 months out, 24 to 48 months out, it's a little less certain. Actually, it's a lot less certain. So we have an understanding what we want to go do and what we want to build and what we think we can accomplish. But the question of ECC funding lingers. And so we're going to take you back through into the kind of the current funding and take a look at the numbers, and we'll do that after we get through the flight plans. But first, I'd like to introduce Nathan Wilcox, who's the CTO of ECC, and he's going to talk you through the specifics for the technical R&D engineering across these next 3 horizons. Nathan.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Josh. So actually, before I dig into this slide in particular, I want to point out that we've been describing our vision for Zcash and also what we're excited about, especially for 2020. And we're planning to publish a blog post, hopefully tomorrow, that covers this product engineering flight plan that I'm about to describe. But that blog post will have some more important context, including describing the arc of how we've gotten here and where we're headed in terms of Zcash development and governance. And also, what is our vision for Zcash today in the next 2 horizons, so in the future. And I think it's really important to share that with the community so that people can see those visions are where we think Zcash can get with the appropriate plan and execution. And it will be really important for the community to understand like what beliefs support that vision that we hold at ECC, potentially to challenge them or to offer alternative visions and so forth. And then in addition, that blog post will cover a lot of the product engineering goals and efforts that I'm going to describe here in these slides. So it'll tie that all together really well. So the first thing I need to say when I'm talking about the ECC flight plan is that Zcash is different now than it has been so far in its lifetime. So what we see here is a timeline of network upgrades. So these are the changes to the consensus protocol. And right now, NU1 is active, that is sapling. NU2 Blossom, the code is finished and shipped with our recent release last week, and that's set to activate in December. So Era 1 is out the door effectively. Era 2 is where we're at today in terms of research and development. And the big change here is that there are multiple companies and organizations and engineering teams working on defining the Zcash protocol today in Era 2. So at the beginning of the talk, I noticed Zuko mentioning that Zcash is moving towards more decentralized governance and it's coming, but I think in a sense it's already here. We've already made some of the first steps, and the discussion amongst the community about dev funding and governance is a subsequent step. And because we are here in Era 2, where there's already multiple developers involved, it's no longer the case that ECC can lay out like a plan for what the Zcash protocol should be in the future and just execute on that. Now we have to present a vision and a plan to reach that vision and rationalize that vision, explain the beliefs underlying it and how we can assess whether the execution of our plan is achieving the vision, and if we do achieve the vision, if it had the expected impact. And so moving forward, I think we're going to get a lot better at that at ECC in these presentations. And likewise, this development of this vision can be a cooperative thing where we develop a common vision with other developers, which is mostly what is happening now. It could also be the case that we have people advocating for different visions who want to put their weight of protocol development or execution behind their advocacy. And I would really like to see that happen because I think that would be very healthy for Zcash. And I think that seems like the direction we are headed in with the community discussions about governance. So I'm really excited about that. Once we get to NU5, the process is no longer going to be ECC's network upgrade process. It's going to be a new process that needs to be integrated into the new governance layer that the community is developing. There's one more bit of context I want to point out here in my thinking about technical strategy. And I think folks at the Zcash Foundation have a similar view, but don't quote me. Let them speak for themselves. And that is sort of that we want to design the technology such that it is resilient against governance breakdowns or governance capture. And then on top of that, we want to design good governance. So there's sort of belt and suspenders. And if you look at some of our technology and some of our processes, I think you'll see that philosophy playing out. For example, the very first upgrade we did in U0 was all about preparing for the eventuality of a contentious chain split. If that should happen, the changes in NU0 are entirely about protecting users in that case. So letting users decide. And I think ultimately, governance always falls back to that. And we're designing the technology and the process to reinforce that base layer protection. So with that thinking, the governance structure we have today, where we have the Zcash Foundation and the ECC collaborating on 2 of 2 multi-sig, both on the development process front and in the legal trademark sharing agreement. Those are sort of extensions or augmentations of the underlying safety around governance. So all that said, that was a lot of context to point out that what I'm going to describe now about ECC plans is just our vision and our plan to where we think we can get Zcash towards those visions by our efforts. But really, it's a multi-developer effort at this point, and so we love that, and we think that's good for Zcash, and we are that ties into our plans. So let's dive into the product engineering plans. So like Josh showed, we have this this framework for designing our technical strategy that includes considering different time horizons and what we think Zcash could be in those time horizons with good effort, and then figuring out what effort we can make today to achieve those time horizons. So the payoff for the effort is different depending on which time horizon we're talking about, but the effort I'm going to talk about today that we are doing is our effort for the rest of this year. And so we have, we're pointing out these time horizons farther than 6 months out. It's not yet clear for ECC what our funding could look like in order to follow through to see the payoffs for these visions. But we think the visions stand by themselves nevertheless, and the plan stands by itself. So these below each vision, you can kind of see some phrases, and those are just some examples. Those aren't comprehensive, but those are some examples of features or events that tie into our vision. And our blog post goes into our visions in more depth, and it will be important for everyone interested to read that. So I'm going to explain what many of these are, but let me just quickly do a summary of the vision. So 0 to 6 months is the most certain because it starts today, and we have an assessment of where we think Zcash is today. And in the 6-month time range, we believe that we will see mobile wallets rolling out shielded support. We believe we'll continue to see a rate of adoption of Zcash, especially on the transparent frontier, that's growing. It's frequently the case that we see announcements of Zcash support by new products or services that surprise us or that we weren't active on. So this is a really good sign. Blossom will be activating, like I said, by the end of the year. Blossom is going to, its key change is just raising the amount of transactions that can be processed by the network per time in the protocol. So it's lowering the block target time. And what this means is, should Zcash have like spikes of demand to send transactions or rapidly growing adoption where there's a sort of growing base rate for sending transactions, the fees for those transactions will be lower than they might be for similar networks like Bitcoin. Moving on to the 6 to 24 months time range. So this is the time range where NU3 and NU4 will activate. Some of the key features on that front will be the supporting functionality that could support applications like TZEC. So we hope to see TZEC rolling out in this time range, even though others are working on that particular product. Likewise, Bolt layer 2 support will be rolling out. Bolt is similar to Lightning, but with stronger privacy guarantees within a single payment channel. And again, the productization and use cases of Bolt will be driven by another company, Bolt Labs. WTPs here, I'll describe a bit more, but this is a building block we created to ship Bolt effectively, and it is useful for future development. So it's going to improve the agility of, like, the technical agility of the Zcash protocol moving forward. And then we're continuing to do layer 1 scalability research, and the sort of flagship result of that so far is our work on Halo. So we're going to continue improving Halo and/or comparing it to many recent alternatives in the same space that have appeared in what's called Snark Timber from last month. Moving out to the 2 to 4 year time range, our vision for Zcash includes it having sort of a new governance model, multiple developer organizations invested in contributing to improving it, sort of multiple visions for where Zcash could go, and a governance process to integrate the best of those to make Zcash the best it can be. And the things we are interested in pushing on would be removing toxic waste and working on layer 1 scalability, transitioning the architecture to a layer 1 scalability architecture. There's some question marks here. Shielded programmability is not a question mark insofar as we know it's totally possible. The only question mark is we want to make sure we're very judicious about the sort of use cases and feature sets we are supporting, so that we can continue to have strong privacy, and we can support programmability that still has strong layer 1 scalability. And then fully shielded blockchain is another question mark. As you may have heard, we believe it's super important in this time range, and probably in the 2 year time range, to keep the rate of adoption of Zcash through the transparent layer growing, because we don't want to inhibit that, and that's like the first wave of adoption that's happening, and it's taking on a life of its own without ECC pushing on it. So that is very valuable. What we would like to do is push on shielded adoption and have that wave of adoption catch up to the first frontier. So how well we can pull that off will tie into how successful we could be at transitioning to a fully ZK Snark-based shielded blockchain in the 2 to 4 year range. So with that, let's dig into some of the specific efforts we're making this quarter. So for each effort, we're describing the goal, which is the payoff we expect on the time horizon, and then a rationale for why we have that goal, and then the effort we're doing in this quarter towards that goal. So the first one here is whitelisted transparent programs. So what this is basically a standardized way to define consensus rule changes to transaction semantics. So by having this building block, it is easier to define new transaction semantics in the future without having to consider the entire scope of all of the consensus protocol. And our rationale, generally we're trying to, for every rationale, support a known use case as well as other speculative use cases. So a known use case is that this immediately supports Bolt in U4, and it also enables other kinds of extensions in the future. If you want to know more about this and you're like a protocol developer, get in touch with us. One way to think about it, so it's just a quick technical summary. It is still a UTXO-based model. It is transparent, so there's not privacy yet. And it is similar, given those, it's kind of similar to Ethereum precompiles. So that's what I can say at this point on this slide. So the next goal here is supporting Fly clients' Merkle mountain ranges in the Zcash protocol. So for the rationale, this supports the TZEC product. and it enables other kinds of light client use cases and interoperability between blockchains. So TZEC, I love TZEC. It is just one example application that is bridging Zcash to Ethereum, but MMR is a building block that can be used to bridge Zcash to other blockchains, and it could be used to build other applications that require bridging support. So I'm really excited about that improving Zcash's attractiveness as a platform to develop on. The next goal for this quarter is to improve our wallet SDKs, especially to roll out support for iOS. So the rationale here is that this supports third-party mobile wallets, and multiple wallet vendors have told us it is basically their requirement that they only ship support for both iOS and Android. And so this step is going to meet that requirement. So I'm excited about that. And it's also going to support an ECC dog food app, is what I'm calling it. So this is a version of the reference wallet that's specifically something we can use and play with at ECC to learn from. And so if you were at ZCon 1, it's very similar to the Swag app there, where our wallet team created sort of an app just for that event where you could buy Swag there. We're going to continue that practice because we can learn a lot about usability issues and deployment issues, and so that we can ensure that our wallet SDKs are supporting realistic use cases. Let's see, 3 more goals that where the payoff is in the 0 to 6 months range are supporting view keys in the Zcash RPC interface. And so the protocol has had view key support in Sapling ever since it launched, but we don't have good tooling support for that, and we want to fix that. And so the rationale here, this supports actually a bunch of potential use cases. A few that I want to highlight would be, it can be very useful for building prototypes or products or explainers that can educate regulators and compliance people at exchanges, because often if there's a thing they can see and interact with, it can help cement the understanding of what is possible. And we think that's really important in order to advance good, healthy regulation that can protect consumers and businesses by including privacy requirements while still meeting AML and KYC obligations. The next one here, EIP 152, is something that David already mentioned. It's a change in Ethereum. An interesting thing here is that this is partially due to our effort. We're more like shepherds of this process, but it is an example of ECC making efforts on other blockchains to the advantage of both Zcash and the other blockchain, in this case, Ethereum. And the rationale here, again, it supports TZEC directly, and then it enables other interoperability applications with Ethereum specifically. A final one here for this quarter that we want to make progress on is improving, making it easier to deploy testnets for Zcash, so that it's easier to prototype. Like if you wanted to make a protocol change, it would be easier for you to prototype your change and test it. Currently, deploying a testnet with Zcash is requires a lot of specialized knowledge and is fairly manual. And this directly supports Bolt Labs' work for their development of Bolt support in Zcash. It also supports us in dog fooding just generally, because we can test all of our feature development in Zcash better. Okay, moving on to the next time horizon. So this is the 6 to 24 months time horizon. Again, the vision here, there's going to be a new governance structure for Zcash. There will be multiple developers continuing to be involved, and also the developers we see involved today, their requested changes will have deployed. So we hope to see their plans coming to fruition in this time range. So the first big obvious goal is that the dev fund protocol support will activate in this time range. And so the rationale here is that ECC is dedicated to fulfilling the community governance process, regardless of which proposal is selected, even if that doesn't allow ECC to continue developing on Zcash long-term by providing development funding or somehow integrating ECC into that development process or that governance structure. Even in that case, ECC is committed to implementing whatever the community decides upon, as long as it's not like outrageously unethical in our view. So the activity we are committing to this quarter to support this goal on the engineering side is to ensure we've reviewed all of the proposals for technical feasibility. And the punchline there is most of the proposals are quite easy to implement, so I don't think we need to worry too much on that side. The next goal we would like to see come to fruition is the TZEC rollout. And so one rationale is this allows ZEC to plug into DeFi and also other Ethereum ecosystem things like Ethereum naming service and so forth. Distinctly, we're enabling a third-party product, and we at ECC believe that's really valuable because another company or multiple companies, Keep and Suma, can try to achieve their product aims independently of ECC, which I think makes the Zcash ecosystem more resilient or robust. And this is also a stepping stone to enable other cross-chain bridging protocol support. Some of these other things, I'm a bit over time, some of these other goals I've already mentioned, such as bolt activation, and the idea here is we're continuing to aim for both the short-term gains. So the last slide, I don't know if you noticed, but it was about implementing a WTP prototype this quarter and improving testnet support this quarter to support bolt activation. But we also want to achieve the actual rollout within the 2-year time range. Let me see. Okay, so scalability 2021 prototype is important. At ZCon 1, we announced that we were aiming to enable Zcash to support billions of users along a long timescale. And so to do that, we would need to begin in earnest a research program. And we did do that. And the first outcome of that after several months is Halo. And so there's still a lot to do on scalability, but we're going to make more progress this quarter, mainly by Halo-related research and development. So this is both improving Halo, but also understanding and analyzing many other related breakthroughs that came out of Snark Timber. Another goal for this time range is to ensure that the development process is one that supports the new governance structure and multiple developers. So right now, ECC has the NEP. We've already seen some pain points with third-party developers getting involved with that. So this quarter, we're going to meet with them and meet with the Zcash Foundation and see if we can improve that moving forward so that it's a more open thing where ECC isn't a gatekeeper. The third goal here for this time range is the rollout of a diverse set of shielded products and services. So we think shielded mobile wallets are beginning to roll out already. We want to have multiple services so that there can be a closed loop within the shielded ecosystem. So perhaps I buy ZEC on an exchange using dollars. I withdraw from their shielded hot wallet to my shielded hardware wallet. And then I send shielded funds to something like OpenBazaar, and I make a purchase of something, and that purchase transaction is also shielded. Once we begin to see the sort of loop close, I think we can expect more adoption of the shielded technology. So moving on to the last time horizon. So the last time horizon is the most speculative. There's two important goals: scalability 2021. And I want to point out here one question we've received about this is, isn't it too early to work on scalability? Shouldn't we wait until we see like a spike of demand or rapid demand growing towards the protocol capacity limits? And we think that this, like making the headroom to meet that demand is one side of the coin, but the other side of the coin is we think it is necessary in the competitive landscape for people who are comparing different blockchains, for people to see a like a proven, believable plan for long-term scalability, as well as some other features such as layer 1 privacy, good governance, and so forth. And so we actually believe getting the plan in place soon is important for adoption soon. And so by aiming for this 2 to 4 year time range to roll that out, I think we'll have benefits for adoption up towards that time range. The last bit here I wanted to touch on, David mentioned this. Right now we have the shielded pool. Like I said, we want in the next year or two, we want to see multiple services supporting shielded interaction within the pool. But in the meantime, we're bridging to these other protocols. We also want to investigate how we can extend the privacy protections and that sort of anonymity set as much as possible towards those other use cases. So with that being said, these are a bunch of initiatives we're working on this quarter to reach a bunch of goals that target both near-term and long-term. And like I said, we hope to have a blog post out tomorrow that includes all these goals, but also spells out our vision a bit more explicitly. And I hope all of you read that and give us feedback soon. So thank you. And with that, let's turn it back to Josh.
Thank you, Nathan. That was awesome. It's a lot of stuff, and the R&D and engineering teams and product teams on our side are cranking, and so it's exciting to see that stuff come out. I'm going to hit the other side, kind of the other areas of the flywheel we talked about, and outline some of the plans for regulation, adoption, and demand. So, like with scaling L1, this team is focused on scaling Zcash as well. And in this case, that means scaling the reach of Zcash to billions of users with the limited resources that we have. So first, I want to highlight a few changes we made to the team to better position our growth for 2020. So Andre recently joined our team to lead our adoption efforts with top tier providers. He's based in New York, which is very strategic for us and where there's a lot of things going on. We're excited to have him. Elena, who some of you may know if you've been at the ZCons, because she's been there and always engaged and always asking awesome questions. And she expressed interest in coming to the team and working with ECC. And that was an offer we couldn't refuse. So she is leading our product marketing efforts, and that includes market research, program, and community efforts, which I'll describe here in a sec. We are shifting how we're doing comms, and we have a comms team now internally that's made up of a few folks, but led by Chris and his team at a company called Agi, and he's working closely with Savannah and Elena as part of that team. And then Savannah, who has been with us for a while and largely working on HR related things, is now doing project management for us. So to keep us all in sync and to make sure that we're executing against plans. So the three areas for our Horizon 1, again, this next 0 to 6 months or so, are broken into 3 areas. So 1 is transparent and shielded adoption, 2 is driving a privacy narrative, and 3 is community work. The Horizon 1 adoption efforts are focused mostly on shielded adoption, although we're doing both transparent and shielded. So our goal as a team is to line up one exchange, one custody provider, and one commercial wallet. And from what I understand from the foundation's work or announcement yesterday, they're going to make it a lot easier to do a lot of that stuff based on the work that they're doing on Ledger. We'll also continue to focus efforts again with top exchanges, wallet providers, OTC desks, and custody providers of the world. I mean, we're already supported on most of them, but we're also pursuing, adoption of Zcash within like top tier commerce providers. There's different kinds of products that are hitting the market. So that's what Andre is really heads down on. The other part of that is we're doing a feasibility study. We're starting to look at like what can we really do to accelerate and drive demand ahead of all of these folks adopting shielded addresses. So it's been a challenge to date because there hasn't been great wallets, right? There's great wallets for supporting transparent addresses, but not great wallets for supporting shielded addresses on things like mobile phone and hardware. So with all the progress and the wave that we anticipate that's coming, we want to be ready to really push that work forward. So there's an idea that we're playing with right now. We've got some others that we'll also study, but look for something coming in the first part of next year on demand generation. Another really important work that we are working on is actively developing campaigns in support of shifting the privacy narrative through shared education, public relations, communication efforts. As you know, I think there's a lot of confusion within the market, within the regulatory community about privacy and the trade-offs between privacy and being able to stop kind of nefarious folks from doing all kinds of bad things. And those people have really strong narratives, those ones that are anti-privacy. And they talk about money laundering, and they talk about child pornography, and they talk about terrorism. And all of those are really important topics, and we should be having those conversations. And it's the intent of this team that we're actively engaged within those conversations. So we have a few campaigns in mind. We're working on a resource center with research and related information on regulation for policymakers, regulators, and also those being regulated. We've learned a lot. We've spent a lot of time and learned a lot through numerous conversations and presentations with key thought leaders and regulators. We can tell you about a lot of those, but we can't tell you about all of them. Some of those have to happen in confidence, though you would probably recognize the names of all of them, of all the folks that we're talking to. The other thing is research on this front. So that includes sponsorship of third-party research. So it's one thing for ECC or the foundation or for somebody to make proclamations about the importance of privacy. It's another for some well-regarded think tanks around the world to also do that. So one of the things that we did is we engaged with the RAND Corporation, who is a global nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization that really works to help improve policy and decision-making. And we engaged with them to do a research report around how Zcash is being used, and specifically if Zcash is being used within dark markets, and if Zcash is being used for money laundering. And we have a pretty good understanding of that based on our own research. But what happens is with that report, we'll have a powerful tool to take back to regulators, starting with Japan on how exactly Zcash is being used. And we're looking to do more of those kinds of research studies. And then finally, community development. So community development it's a key part of our strategy. And it was highlighted really by some of the interoperability stuff by DC and Nathan. And I think this is a place, honestly, kind of mea culpa back with the community. Like, we haven't done a great job of this in recent months. We've been a little bit more hands-off and a little bit more kind of internally focused, and we've got some rationale for why that is. But we really want to ramp that back up. And I think that's really important. So that's a key piece of work that Elena is really working on, is that community plan. We're working to create a vibrant community program that includes various users, developers, businesses, community leaders, and are working to formalize a specific developer program in support of those efforts to further participation in Zcash development. And then there's some other pilot things that we've been doing. And so one of those I'll highlight, a community project that I'll highlight at the end of the web stream. That's maybe a little bit different way of looking at and thinking about community, but hugely important. And then in the longer term, the 6 to 24 months, as I mentioned earlier, our longer term horizon work is based on the assumption of funding. I'm hoping that we'll have enough to be able to really kind of execute across some of these programs and campaigns that we're developing. And also, we've been off and on, hot and cold with Asia. We've been cold with Asia, not because Asia is not super important. It may be the most important geography for driving medium of exchange adoption of Zcash worldwide. It's purely financial. The coin price, has kind of makes it difficult for us, right, to invest as much as we need to invest in order to make that work. We've been actively engaging. Zuko was out there this year. I've spent weeks out in Asia, across China, Japan, Singapore, Korea, meeting with regulators, meeting with exchanges, meeting with investors, trying to get an understanding of what's happening on the ground, making friends. We know how big the need is. We know what's at stake, and we know what it will take. But we need the funding to be able to do it. So I would like to aggressively go back into Asia next year, maybe second, third quarter, and start to try to drive some of the campaigns that we would like to do out there. So that's a summary of what we're doing on scaling Zcash on the adoption and demand side. DC is now going to walk us through. We've talked about funding and some of these time horizons, and DC is going to walk us through our approach both to the dev discussion and possible implications of different funding models.
Great, thanks, Josh. So folks, before we get into too many details, I want to cover briefly a history of how the Zcash project has been funded. In short, the Zcash project never did an ICO. We thought that ICOs basically gave teams too much upside upfront. And this can, similar to startup venture capital financing, too much money too soon can actually be counterproductive, can be very difficult, can be debilitating. So instead, the founders created what was called the Founders Reward, which provided that 20% of issuance of new coins within the first 4 years would go to founders and investors. Notably, some of those founders pledged a chunk of their FR to the ECC and then later the Zcash Foundation to provide for the continued care and feeding of the Zcash project. Now, what's interesting is that this funding runs out by design in November of 2020. So why did we design a funding model that would sort of self-destruct after 4 years? Well, the idea was that perpetual funding for anything can create bureaucracy and a sense of complacency and laziness and inaction. So we wanted the community to be able to decide after the first 4 years what funding would look like for the project for the next 4 years and beyond. So that inflection point is now coming up. And what we've seen is that the community has started to talk about how to fund the project going forward. But we get a lot of questions from folks that are saying, well, hey, why has the ECC largely been absent from this conversation? Well, we've been absent for a number of reasons. One is that we believe that as the world's premier private store of value, we need real decentralization, which means that we can't be the ones calling the shots. We need the community to tell us what this should look like going forward. And as such, we've stepped back intentionally to let the community drive this conversation. We also think this is important because whatever decision is made here about what the future funding looks like, it needs to be legitimate. If that decision is made and it's perceived as being illegitimate, that would likely result in fragmentation, multiple chain splits. So we believe that this real decentralization that we need is only possible if multiple parties are responsible for driving Zcash forward. But with that said, I do want to take a moment to talk about a few important principles that I believe are cornerstones of any subsequent development fund that would be in line with the mission of Zcash, which is to empower everybody with economic freedom and opportunity. So one, a new dev fund should only be used to support active contributors. And explicitly, this means that a new debt fund would not be used to provide rewards to former investors or passive founders. The ECC I mentioned earlier doesn't want to crowd other developers out. We want to welcome them in. We want them to build on top of and integrate with Zcash. And that's only going to happen if those third-party developers feel that they can sit at a level playing field with other entities like the Zcash Foundation and like the ECC to be able to receive funds to build on Zcash. We feel strongly that it would be a big mistake to change the 21 million supply cap of Zcash. Bitcoin set this cap back in more than a decade ago, and we believe that it's important to maintain this at this point. We also believe that the governance of the project really needs to evolve to make Zcash more decentralized and inclusive. One of the critical things that we had to figure out as part of this discussion is how to properly manage the trademark Zcash. Zcash has a tremendous brand. As we mentioned, it's listed on some of the best exchanges in the world, ubiquitous wallet support, and it really matters that what is Zcash is really Zcash. And since inception, the ECC has devoted a lot of time, energy, resource, and money into developing that brand and protecting that mark. And so in light of this inflection point with the end of the FR and the community conversation about funding going forward, we thought that it was extremely important that this trademark be handled very carefully. And as such, we have entered into an agreement with the Zcash Foundation to donate the mark to the foundation. But we didn't want to take that lightly. We wanted to ensure that upon doing that, that if the foundation itself was somehow captured or became evil, that the Zcash token holders and the stakeholders, the people that really care about Zcash and its mission, could still be represented. So we're pleased to announce that as of November 6th, the ECC and the foundation have signed a trademark sharing agreement, which we believe is the first of its kind in the industry. And we think this provides meaningful protection for the Zcash brand on behalf of the community and the token holders. The agreement specifically calls out that the ECC and the foundation must agree on what is Zcash. And if they disagree, a mediator will rely upon community sentiment to figure out what's the best path forward and in the best interest of the community. Getting this done in legalese was actually quite difficult, and that's why it took, I think, as long as it did. But what this means, and the reason I think this is meaningfully better than the 2 of 2 multisig that we've been talking about for a long time, is it means that if either the ECC or the Zcash Foundation were to be somehow compromised, the situation wouldn't result in a deadlock where nothing could be called Zcash. This delay and the legal work that we had to do to get this done, it was painful. It set back the timeline quite a bit for figuring out the feature selection for the 4th network upgrade. But that delay did create space for voices we hadn't previously heard from in the community to step up and to express themselves and to make proposals as to what they think the future of Zcash governance and funding should look like a year from now. So with that behind us, let's take a look at what the block reward will look like for Zcash after the first halvening. So for those of you that aren't sort of deep in crypto, you're probably wondering, well, what's this halvening? The idea here is that the Zcash monetary supply curve, the rate at which new coins are created over time, reduces over time. And so the first major inflection point comes in about a year. And it will mean that the block reward, the number of new coins that are created per block, will be cut in half. So with that in mind, at current prices, which I put in here 40, I think we're just a little under that today, the reward per day for new blocks created is $144,000. That reward, calculated on a monthly basis, is just about $4.4 million. So assuming that the community decides to go with about a 20% dev fund, meaning that 20% of newly issued coins would be allocated for development, what does that look like in US dollars at these current price levels? Well, at 40, that's about 876K to developers, and the miners would still be making 3.5 million per month to secure the network. At 80, It's 1.7 million for dev, 7 million to miners. And at 120, which is a price level that we saw not that long ago, that's north of $2.6 million a month for development and over $10 million a month to miners. So looking at these numbers, I asked the community to ask itself, are we investing the right amount in the security of the network? Is it not enough, or is it too much? Now let's take a look at what a 20% dev fund post-halvening would look like if it were split amongst multiple recipients. And let me also be clear, I do believe that such a dev fund should be split amongst multiple recipients because that's important to bring about the decentralization that we think is so critical to the mission. So if the ECC were to take 100% of the dev fund, and again, we're not advocating for that, but that would be 876K per month. And again, the miners would be getting 3.5 million. As we look at cutting that down, 75% to ECC, 50% to ECC, 25% to ECC, what we see is that in pure USD terms, at these price levels, these resource allocations are below what the ECC is presently spending to do all of the cool stuff that we've just told you about. And it's very likely that if proposals that have these funding levels are set, the ECC would not be able to continue to execute across all those initiatives. I do believe that there is incredible benefit in ramping up the level of investment that the community provides to third-party developers to build upon Zcash, to integrate with Zcash. But I think that that funding should be ramped up over time because it's quite easy to say you're going to execute. It's actually quite difficult to execute over time. And I believe that the ECC has a demonstrated track record of execution that's unparalleled in this industry. So if we look at what would be the implications of a proposal being selected that underfunded ECC vis-a-vis levels that have been recently reported in our financial transparency reports. To be very blunt, at the current price level with ZEC at 40 or shy of 40, no proposal that's presently being discussed by the community would allow us to keep doing what we're doing the way that we're doing it today. And today we're not just doing software engineering and R&D. We're also doing product, we're working on growth and also regulatory relations. It's also important to call out that some proposals have suggested that the Zcash Foundation basically be the first hop and that they then provide funds to other third parties, including the ECC. This may introduce additional organizational constraints and potential legal complications. So if this is the direction the community decides to go in, additional work would be required in order to make sure that these risks or constraints are properly mitigated. So in summary, I want the community to recognize that if a proposal is selected that provides ECC with less than about 750K per month, ECC would need to restructure operations significantly. That said, we do believe that decentralization is desirable. And we think that this third-party dev funding, which is essential for decentralization, should be ramped from its present levels to greater increasing levels over time, but potentially not all at once. So with that in mind, what is next on this process of figuring out how to decide how this issue will be resolved? Next slide, please, Josh. So the Zcash Foundation has posted a blog a couple days ago laying out a new timeline for essentially encouraging the community to converge, to iterate on, to polish, to change the proposals that they've made, because there's been a lot of discourse in the community. And I think folks are realizing that certain attributes of some proposals are very desirable, but no proposal is perfect. So what the foundation is asking the community to do here is to really work on these hard, because the deadline for finalizing these proposals is, again, this is set by the Zcash Foundation, is this Thursday. On Friday of this week, the foundation will publish a poll letting the community know which ZIPs, the Zcash improvement proposals, will be used to basically vote on. And then the polling or the voting will open on Saturday, and it will run through the end of the month. At the end of the polling period, The foundation will review the results, the ECC will review the results, and then we'll work together to really get a sense of what does this mean? What does the community want? And see what additional steps are required from there. So in summary, this process has been hard. It's been painful. The Founders Reward was controversial in the beginning, but it really helped us to deliver consistently for the first 4 years. It's my belief that the sooner that the Zcash teams have clarity around future funding, the sooner we can get back to focusing on the mission of Zcash, which is to empower everybody worldwide with economic freedom and opportunity. So with that, I'm gonna kick it back to Josh. Unless Zuko, you've got your boom down.
Can I
thought
jump
you
in?
wanted to get a word in edgewise there.
Just a personal note. Can y'all hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
I'm up. Just real quick, with my hat on as CEO of the Electric Coin Company, this is really painful and scary because we don't have clear line of sight for long-term funding, and we have a responsibility to our employees to give them that in order to keep them together and keep them focused on producing the best things that they can produce. But that responsibility to the employees is not, like, the existence of these employees who are really high caliber team is not adversarial to the interests of the community. It's complementary. The team is an asset to the community. If I take off my ECC CEO hat and just put on my Zcash community member hat, I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning, that I'm super bullish on Zcash. Like, this governance process is already had the effect that the community has credibly taken up power from ECC, so that ECC no longer has the ability to unilaterally make decisions on behalf of the community. And like I said, it seems clear that the community is heading toward funding further improvements to Zcash from Zcash itself, which is the best model. So even though it's harmful to have the disruption and the uncertainty in the short term, we're already in a really good place and we're heading in the right direction. That's all.
Thank you, Zuko. And thanks, DC. Hopefully that provides a lot of clarity for the community on kind of this dev fund process and how we've been looking at it. We talk about it almost daily, so we are actively engaged and listening and watching. I want to take you through one final story before we get to Q&A, just for a few minutes. It ties together a number of the elements of the flywheel, including our research, engineering, regulatory adoption, demand gen. And you may see some of these as the story unfolds. Where this starts was an article that I came across in 2018 about a teacher, Carlos Acevedo, who's teaching in the South Bronx, teaching high school in the South Bronx. And he wanted his kids to get an understanding of crypto and talk to them about financial freedom. And because he can't give away crypto to kids in high school, he waited until they graduated, and then he gifted them all $5 in Zcash. And the reason he picked Zcash was twofold. One, at the time, the transaction fees on Bitcoin were too high because they didn't have, it doesn't scale at L1. So everything was kind of bogged down. And two, he wanted them to understand the distinction between Bitcoin and a privacy preserving coin. So he gave them all Zcash. Washington Post picked it up. I read it, and then I reached out to Carlos. We're going to come back to Carlos. This is a picture of me and my son and my wife, and we're in a slum in Mumbai, India. We do work with a people group called the Banjari, and we have been doing it for years, since 2003. They are largely unbanked or underbanked. So I have a bit of a context of what that means and the potential for DeFi. But last year I was at an event or at a meeting with some friends and some leaders from across crypto that are actively working on DeFi solutions. And we were sitting in a circle with candles, and everybody was talking about DeFi and the potential impact to the and underbanked, but none of what they were saying fit with what I knew about the needs of my friends in the slums of Mumbai. And I asked the group that was there to raise their hand and asked if they had actually ever engaged with anyone who was unbanked. And no one raised their hand. I think Zuckerberg had the same experience when he was testifying in front of Congress. Somebody asked him, do you even know, like, do you even know anybody that's unbanked? Have you ever been unbanked? And it was a very uncomfortable moment for him. Because the reality is the people that are building solutions for the unbanked in crypto, most have never met a person who needed the tech that they were building for. Which takes me back to Carlos and the unbanked and the underbanked in New York. So we're working on these solutions. DeFi and DC talked a lot about that market opportunity and the potential for interoperability with some of these other chains for that use case. And we talk about economic freedom for everyone, but often when we're talking about the unbanked and the underbanked, we think we're talking about the third world. And Carlos, in one of our conversations, reminded me that that's not the case. He said, take a closer look, because the unbanked are in your own backyard, Josh. They're in New York and they're in the South Bronx, and perhaps we should engage there. And so it's important to also to understand, as we were talking, that DeFi isn't going to solve the needs of the South Bronx. The people of the South Bronx are going to solve their own problems. They understand their problems. They understand their context, but they need access, they need training, and they need a means to make their voice heard. Here's the data of the Bronx versus the Upper East Side. So if you're not familiar with the landscape of New York, these two boroughs are 5 miles from one another. A quick train ride or an Uber ride. In that one, the median household income is 6 figures, and the other for Hispanics and Blacks in the South Bronx, it's under 30K. And in the South Bronx, incomes are decreasing while they're accelerating in the Upper East Side. They're accelerating among Wall Street. They're accelerating around among those that are working on DeFi solutions and crypto-based solutions. There's real poverty, 30% poverty rate in the South Bronx. And the folks that experience most are women. And if you look beyond that, even to beyond kind of the traditional economic measures, look at the average commute time. The people of the Upper East Side have more time in their day than the people in the South Bronx. It's a problem. And this is a tale of two cities, just 5 miles apart. This is a picture of the South Bronx. It's a picture from a walking tour that we did so we could better understand and see the neighborhood. Much is boarded up. Signs of struggle are everywhere. And the streets are filled with these cash checking services and payday loan services and pawn shops, but not banks. Per capita, I think in the US, there are less banks in the South Bronx than I think anywhere else in the US. So we started working with Carlos on a plan to bring the crypto industry into context into the South Bronx. And that's where the Crypto Community Project was born. And we brought together an initial cohort of companies for 2 days of engagement. Sometimes community isn't what you think. Sometimes community is the broader crypto community and working together to solve common problems or work together on common problems. And so we reached out to various friends to start to bring them together to pilot an idea for classes that would allow for these projects and kids living within this community to come together. We met in context. So we didn't bring folks out of context. We went to the Bronx. And in this case, it was an old penny factory in the South Bronx called the Banknote, ironically enough. And the classes that we went through included the basics of crypto and the importance of privacy and the fundamentals of Zcash and various use cases and applications. And these kids were amazing and smiling and engaged. And in spite of those sad buildings, boarded up buildings, we had a room full of smiling students with great questions, actively engaged. Some of these questions were mind-blowing. They had questions about freedom, economic freedom, and what that really meant. They had questions about safety. And if I transfer money between you and me in the South Bronx and you're my neighbor, do you know how much I have? And does that put me at risk of theft or robbery? And we talked about regulation and whether or not, if they have to go through a regulated exchange, if it's really for them, or is it really just for the people that can get onto a regulated exchange? And here Gemini is being grilled on whether or not a person truly owns the Zcash stored at Gemini if they aren't in the possession of the actual keys. In just a couple of days of classes, the understanding of kind of the nuances of this space and the risks came right to the surface with this group. As part of the class, the participants also received Zcash, and they loaded up their Exodus and Flexa wallets, and they had a homework assignment to go and spend some of it. And they bought movie tickets, and they bought video games, and they bought ice cream with their Zcash. And we had amazing time, and we learned a lot from one another, and we decided to encode all of their names into the Zcash blockchain. So that's the transaction ID, the encrypted memo field, that transaction ID has all of these kids' names encoded in the Zcash blockchain forever. So we wrestled with how, giving limited funding, do we scale Zcash into all the various contexts where it's needed most? The answer is we don't do it alone. We need folks like Carlos, and we need to be able to get behind them. And we also need reporters and PR who are storytellers who can amplify and spread the word. And we need to work with partners like Gemini and Flexa and Masari and others with resources and megaphones who have a common mission. And we also want to provide internships into this space to include people in. When we talk about inclusion, the broader kind of developer community, part of inclusion is inviting people in who are on the outside looking in, trying to understand and giving them an opportunity to engage. This is Tashima. And so Tashima has been working at ECC as an intern this semester. And two others also received internships from other projects this semester through this program. And now this brings me to Mo, who's not from the South Bronx. Mo is from Syria. And he learned about the program through CoinDesk and that article that was published by the storyteller. Mo is a Syrian refugee and a fan of Zcash, and he was at ZCon, so you might have met him. And Mo protested against the Syrian government when he lived there. He was a business owner. His life was there, his family's there, and his assets were frozen, including all of his real estate, all of his business, all of his bank accounts, because he was expressing a voice that was counter to what the state wanted to hear. So he was forced to leave the country with nothing and rebuild his life in Jordan. And then he discovered Bitcoin, and he discovered Zcash as a means to protect his wealth from seizure, and committed to teach other refugees how to do the same. And so he is working with a foundation called the Karam Foundation based in Chicago. And now he's doing his own classes, like we were doing in the South Bronx, to teach Syrian refugees in Turkey. The first two classes will be mid and late December. It's the same thing, right? Where he's bringing together people within a context that he intimately understands. This is what crypto looks like in context. And this is what I think Zcash looks like in context. So last week we had another session of the Crypto Community Project in the South Bronx. We had some new speakers and some new students. We learned some lessons about what works and what doesn't. We had a reporter who heard about this also show up from the New Yorker, this little magazine, and we're hoping that they'll write about it soon. But the call to action is to get more involved. So we've got a website up called underestimated.electriccoin.co. If you want to learn more, get involved, see all of these amazing, we have all of these amazing pictures of the South Bronx and these kids and their amazing smiles, and murals, and folks of photos on the streets. go to the site, check it out, and then join us. Click on this link, and let's bring economic freedom to everyone. So thank you for spending time with us. I hope this was super useful for you. We covered a lot. It was really dense. We want to spend some additional time with you for as long as you want to answer whatever questions that you have. I think Savannah has them queued up. If you missed the first part of the session, please go to this website, go to Slido, sli.do, and enter the event code ECC Livestream. And you'll be able to log your questions or upvote questions that are already there if you want to make sure that they rise to the top of the list. Okay, so I think Savannah is feeding some questions. First question, what is the biggest threat to Zcash? Nathan, why don't you take this question? What is the biggest threat to Zcash?
All right. Yeah, 4 things immediately come to mind. So one is irrelevance. And I think that's something people don't consider often, especially when there's hype, but there's always the risk that we don't find a strong product market fit, that Zcash doesn't find that, or that even the larger crypto space doesn't find that. So I think the thing to do there is to be continually vigilant. Next thing that comes to mind is competition. We see competition in this space, it's ramping up. There's more than there used to be. One really notable thing, I think, is that if you look just in like the last year, especially the last 6 months, if you look across blockchains, you see many of them adopting privacy as a feature. So it's happening on Ethereum, it's happening on Decred, it's happening on Tezos. So I think the whole like privacy coin distinction is going away. I think this is an example that there's demand there, or at least the industry believes there is. I think they have good reasons to believe that. And right now, Zcash is in a great position there, but we can't rest on our laurels on that front. 2 more that come to mind would be bad governance of Zcash, which I don't think can destroy Zcash. Like I said earlier, I think there's 2 layers, and I think if the upper layer human governance melted down, I think the Zcash user base and community could survive. Maybe they wouldn't have the trademark, but they would have the decentralized system and the code and the economic weight. But I do think that would really slow down Zcash adoption. And then another area that I'm concerned about is regulation. I think there's some potential for good regulation. There's some potential for bad regulation. The wrong regulation will slow down Zcash. I don't think it'll destroy Zcash. But worse, the wrong regulation is going to make the world worse for people using cryptocurrencies. And so I think we really need to remain vigilant on that front to ensure regulation is good and protects users and helps us fulfill our mission. So those are my top 4 threats.
Thank you. The next question is, I wonder what the trade-offs are to this Zec-like client, Zec wallet-like client. Does it not require a full node? Is that a good thing? Or it does not, is that a good thing? DC, do you want to take that question?
Sure. So as is common in information security, it's frequently all about usability versus security. And that's the case here as well. So the Zec Wallet Lite is a very quick, easy way to kind of get your fingers dirty with Zcash and be able to very quickly send and receive shielded Zcash. But there are some drawbacks. One is that the code base has not been audited. So the ECC spends a fortune each year on security audits of the actual Zcash D software and its supporting libraries. That's not presently the case for the Lite or the Zec Wallet Lite projects, although I do understand that the foundation will be prioritizing security audits of that code base at some point in the future. So I think the most secure, if you're depending upon Zcash for your life and liberty, run a full node, use network privacy, announce your transactions over Tor, use Tor at the peer-to-peer layer, and all of that. But if you want to use Zcash to get more familiar with the protocol and to engage in non-life-threatening transactions, Zec Wallet Lite is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, DC. Next question up is where and how does ECC sell their Zcash? I'm not sure we've ever publicly discussed this before, which is fun. So with that, I'm going to introduce Andy, who is our CFO. Andy, will you answer this question for us?
Great, yes, thanks, Josh. At ECC, we sell coins weekly through exchanges. The amount sold varies based upon our cash needs while balancing our cash on hand.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Next question is view keys. What's the progress on view keys, Nathan?
Yeah, so view keys have been supported in the sapling protocol since it launched. So that design, has gone through our security auditing process, and the consensus rules support them. And wallets, every wallet now that uses sapling internally generates view keys. The only thing that's missing is tooling support for users to access those view keys and share them with each other, and then also applications that can use the view keys. We had an earlier version working for Sprout in the RPC interface, but that protocol support for view keys was not nearly as good. So it only showed incoming transfers and not outgoing transfers. And finally, there's already code implemented that does much of the work for view keys. The things we need to do is to define the interface and also make sure it's meeting use cases that are the right use cases. So part of the work we're doing is identifying use cases to figure out their requirements. And that's the main component, I think. There's another piece here where we now have 2 code bases that support wallets. So one is part of our mobile wallet SDK, and that can potentially have view key support. And then we have Zcash D, and some of that code may overlap and some may not. So we may roll out support in one or the other first. So our goal by the end of this quarter is to have one working prototype implementation. So it won't be in our releases yet, but people who are eager to play with it will be able to play with it, and it will be in a release soon, hopefully at the beginning of next year.
Thanks, Nathan. Hey, Zuko. When hyper Zcash is I can't even say it. Hyper Zcashization.
I guess hyper Zcashization is our third bag, our third big hairy audacious goal. And so when that's going to happen, well, unfortunately, we can count on the other corrupt exploitative systems of the world to continue failing and exploiting people year after year. And so when it's going to happen is when Zcash is there and is known and is accessible to everyone who needs it. I'm fond of, there's a great quote that I learned from Milton Friedman, who said something like, it's not a quote, it's now a paraphrase, it said something like, we make progress not by persuading other people that their ideas are wrong and ours are right, but by having an alternative ready when their ideas fail and they need an alternative.
That was a good answer. That was a better answer than I expected, Zuko. You should do more talking. Okay, we're going to have time for one more question, and we need to close it down at the bottom of the hour. But what we're committed to doing is to answering any remaining questions out on the forum. So look for that out on the forum. So this next question is, hello, how the team assesses the changes to support of shielded transactions in existing hardware while it's at 2020. The same question regarding IOs. DC, did you have some thoughts on this?
Sure. So Shielded, given that Zcash has a great reputation as a private store of value, shielded hardware wallet support's been an appealing target for a long time. So ECC engineer Strad demonstrated some proof of concept work in this direction on stage at ZCon 1 back in June, which was really exciting. But there's quite a lot that needs to go into getting that support productionized. So I was pleased to see the Zcash Foundation in their 2020 roadmap announced that they're actively pursuing this goal. And I think Ledger is the partner that they're working with at this time for that support. So will it happen in 2020? That is the plan. And I'm very much looking forward to it. Would love to see Trezor support and other hardware wallet support in 2020 as well. And the second part of that question was about iOS. Assuming you're talking about Apple's mobile operating system and not Cisco's network router operating system, yes. So there is an ECC team called the Wallet Team that has already built an Android SDK and is in the process of building an iOS SDK, which will make it easy for mobile application developers to integrate shielded Zcash support into their products. So that is very much on track for 2020.
All right, thank you, DC. With that, that's a wrap of our Q4 live stream. Again, hope it was awesome for you guys. Some great stuff ahead. Really looking forward to 2020. And again, we'll get back to you on the rest of the questions in the foundation. If you have not checked out Zuko's awesome picture, he's zooming it in for you. And we look forward to engaging with you on the forum. Talk to y'all soon. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.